Good evening, everyone. Welcome to a late night episode. I'm out of work, so it is like almost 2 in the morning. I figure, what the hell, why not do another episode as long as the house is somewhat quiet? So let's see what we have in store for us today. Hmm. Down there, share screen. There we go. And share. I'm not sure how far I'm going to get today because I have a cat in here, and we'll see if he lets me go ahead and do this. All right, so I suppose I should start playing this. Where are we? Is that it? Nope. There we go. And play. Oh, I forgot to say this, what this is about. This is Ty the Rebel. Ty is my half brother, and I'll let him tell his story because he can do it better than I can. So let's go back to the happy music.
Hi there, and welcome to I'm Only Human, a podcast that attempts to explain how to coexist with other humans. This podcast is going to dive into topics like: is it possible to overcome human nature? Are rules and laws necessary for taming bad behaviors, or are they simply a control mechanism crafted by other disturbed minds? Why do we fight with each other? And how does traditional religion impact us? Can social disease be healed through individual recovery? My name is Jen, and I'm an average human. Before I begin, I would like to state that I will be talking about controversial things such as, but not limited to, religion, God, the Bible, 12-step programs, and politics. I am not an expert, and I don't claim to be one. I will, however, be referencing Alcoholics Anonymous because it is the granddaddy of all other 12-step programs. I will also be quoting things from the Bible and mentioning God along with different religions. I'm not trying to promote a particular program, nor am I trying to convert anyone. I believe religion gives us a foundation, and 12-step recovery guides people down a path to self actualization. Social disease has been with us since the dawn of time, but recovery has still been achieved by millions of people. Through recovery, healing is possible. I believe that changed minds and attitudes can change our world. Okay, guests, today we have a new special guest. This is Ty. Welcome, Ty. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell us about your story?
Hi, my name is Ty. A little bit about me. My story starts August 1st, 1984, in a little town called Waukesha in Wisconsin.
Waukesha. Yeah, everyone has problems saying that.
Waukesha.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I ended up moving to Minnesota when I was about 4. Prior to that, I lived with my mom, and our father was kind of MIA in the picture after a specific time. So I ended up going to live with him in Minnesota after he moved, and life was rough. Haven't really talked to any of my siblings really about. Well, I talked to Jason about some of it. Just growing up in a house with our father and my stepmother at the time, Debbie. It was difficult, and I didn't make things any easier for myself or anybody else. I was a problem child, and Dad worked a lot, and I didn't understand as a kid the necessity of needing to do that, because when you're a kid, you can't comprehend those kind of things. You just know that you need and want something that isn't there. So that really started my attention seeking and my negative behavior, because I realized that if I acted up, I got attention from him. And negative attention was better than none. So really, I continued, as a child into adolescence, having lots of behavioral problems. Really comes down to mental health issues that I was having, even at a young age. And I needed medication that dad didn't think was appropriate. So he refused to let the doctor put me on it. And at the time, that was Ritalin. And back in the 90s, there was a lot of what was referred to as Ritalin babies. And he just didn't want the stigma or whatever. So I never ended up getting on some of the medications I believe I needed, which also led to some of my behaviors.
So are you
around 13
ADD or ADHD? What's the reason for the Ritalin, did you think?
Well, actually, I'm both. I'm
Okay.
attention deficit and I'm hyperactive. So it's like, and I have OCD. So it's like this constant battle that's always fighting itself. I have been diagnosed with bipolar too, although I don't really agree with that diagnosis. And I don't believe I've really ever seen much of like the manic side of it. For me, it's basically just been major depression. So around 13, my behaviors led to me getting incarcerated in juvenile facilities. And that basically went on until I was 18. So from 13 to 18, I bounced around from facilities to facilities for one criminal activity or another, whether it was stealing the car, running away from the house, etc.
And what was
then
it like inside those facilities? Was it tough to be in and out of those? And how did dad react to it? I don't know anything about dad. I don't have a relationship, never really did. So, how did he react to everything you were doing?
he didn't really have time to react. Like I was lighting so many fires, that he couldn't put them all out. And eventually it just got to the point where I was turned over to the state, and the state dealt with me.
Did that make you
I think
feel more worthless because he didn't have time to deal with it? Or how did that make you feel?
I feel like by the time I got incarcerated at 13, I was already broken. I feel like he had broken my spirit. And I mean that in just the absolute demeaning things he said, the things that he did, the physical abuse, the emotional abuse. It was not fun. And I think dad just got to a point where once I was locked up, he kind of was able to divorce himself of a lot of that baggage, and there was an occasional visit or a few bucks in a Christmas card or something like that, but generally it was like he had moved on with Debbie. That part of his life had been resolved so they could move on and do the things that they were supposed to do before I ever came into the picture unexpectedly. Debbie was really great at getting dad going, pushing dad's buttons about me. And a lot of it was just petty kid stuff, oh, I wanted to sleep over at such and such's house, or it's just little petty kid stuff kids do. And she would push his buttons because she knew that he would go off and he'd have to go off on me and deal with it. And then Debbie would step in after it got out of control, which it always did, and she would play the hero and, Rick, no, no, no. So it was like this constant battle of, on the surface, it seemed like Deb and Dad and me were like this family of, put together things. And it really just wasn't that way at all. It just wasn't. There was constant things about money, which in turn led to problems with me. And it was just, it got to the point where I would sit at the kitchen table and I would literally just zone out and he would just be there yelling at me for hours. And every now and then he'd slam his fist on the table or punch a wall or do something to see if he still had my attention, in which case, he usually got it back. But it was just like I got to the point where I had to tune it out because I couldn't deal with it anymore.
Makes sense.
And that's something I think I've held on or did hold on to, that resentment growing up in that house with the psychological and physical abuse. I carried that, and then I carried anger towards him when I went through my near-death experience in 2010 with my spinal cord injury, and he was nowhere to be seen for any of that. And I did really hold that against him. And it's like, the one time I really needed him, he wasn't there. And I feel like the same can be said for all of us. You, Julie and Jason, I feel like, we all have that same feeling, like in ways that we were just failed by our father. But
at least I had a stepdad, so he kind of stepped in and took the place. So I did have a father figure, but my dad was never my father figure.
Right. And really, I kind of have to agree that my father really wasn't either. And Dave kind of became, in ways, a mentor and a father figure, especially after Dad left for Texas. Anyway, kind of getting back to 2000, I was spent locked up. And at 18, I was released from juvenile facilities and spent time in a state hospital. Spent 3 months in the psych ward, if you will, and basically was put on medications that I didn't really need. I kind of turned into Gumby, if you will, and was just kind of going along. Got out of there, went to a halfway house, spent another 9 months there, and then was able to get out into transitional housing. That went on. I was in my apartment for about a year, and then I moved in with somebody else who was also in aftercare from the halfway house. And lack of sleep and some very poor decision making. I committed an armed robbery in 2010 or 2005. Basically, stole a lady's purse in a parking lot. I spent time in prison for that. That was for me a bit of a game changer. After you're 18, suddenly you're not going to juvie anymore. You're going to the big boy house. So when I was 4 days before my 21st birthday, I was thrown into that world in prison. And I was an attractive young guy, so I constantly had to watch out for predators, people who are trying to take advantage of you. I mean, prison is not exactly like it's portrayed in the movies, but it's not exactly a place that I said I ever wanted to go back to. And I did have an incident where I was physically assaulted. Somebody punched me in the face and gave me a couple of black eyes. And ultimately, that was over a misunderstanding, and we worked through it. But things like that happen. I got out of prison and moved in with Dave and Jackie. That lasted for about a year or so while I was on parole, and was going to school for auto body repair, kind of following in the footsteps of Dad and Dave, and kind of just found out that I didn't really like the body work side of it. I was more of a mechanical guy. I ended up having to quit school because I'm like, well, I don't want to waste an opportunity for somebody else who wants to do body work while I'm just showing up, just simply to do it. I left on good terms, but then after that, I started working at Shell. I started out as just a general oil change guy. By the time I left that position in 2010, I was managing, the shop. I was doing inventory. I was doing all the maintenance. Pretty much I was running the building side of it, less the convenience store. And that was a big responsibility, and it was a lot of work, but it got exhausted. So in 2010, I kind of parted ways, and I started drinking excessively after I stopped working. Part of it was I was bored, and part of it is there's just this alcoholic gene that is in our gene pool. It's just there. So I liked the way it felt, and I found myself just spending as much time intoxicated as I possibly could, which led to making some really bad life choices. Ultimately, those bad life choices led to me falling off of a cliff in 2010, fell like 40 feet and landed in a pine tree and shattered my spine. Got tangled, got myself untangled, then fell another 20 feet, shattered my ankles, and started rolling downhill. And it was all rocks. There was like no trees or anything left. And I was headed for the Mississippi River. Like, it was rushing by, and I was getting ready to drown. And this little tiny twig was sticking up between two rocks, and I grabbed it and I held on for dear life. And I think that kind of leads to where I believe I started to form a relationship with God, or what I call God.
That's one extreme way to get there, but I'm glad you found something.
It was like I knew I didn't have the strength myself to hold on. I was so weak. I was, my back was shattered. My ankles were broken. I was in a level of pain I can't even explain, that no human should ever be in. And I sat there and I said, God, if you can hear me, I need you. I said, I'm not ready to die. I want to live. I said, I messed up, and this isn't the way I want my story to end. And for 7 hours, I held on to that little twig, screaming for help. And about 7 or 8 in the morning, a lady on her bike heard me, and I don't know how she managed to get down there, but basically I believe that was my guardian angel. And she called 911. The fire department had to come and get me off the side of this cliff with, sleds and cables, and it was excruciating, and I was so confused and disorientated, and I was still drunk even 8 hours after I hadn't had any alcohol. I mean, that's just how drunk I was that night. And I ended up in the hospital, obviously. They tried to do surgery the first time, and I flatlined on the table. Basically, I died, and they had to resuscitate me because I had an extreme case of pneumonia that I didn't know I had. I had this cough before all this happened. Well, the pneumonia just about killed me anyway. They had to cancel the surgery and put me into an induced coma and put me into this bed that basically turned you to keep things moving, to try to break it up. Had, breathing tube and all that down in my throat, and came to out of that and thought that the surgery had happened. I don't remember experiencing any bright light or, the pearly gates, or, all these people have different stories, about their near-death experience, or, actually dying and being resuscitated. I didn't see anything like that. But in the hospital, once they were finally able to do the surgery after I healed from the pneumonia, they had to do a triple fusion, and basically part of my spine is now just metal. It's caged, which affects my range of motion, and I'm left with a lot of pain as a result of the damage that occurred to my spinal cord from the injury, and unfortunately the spinal cord injury really has been the least of it. I mean, it was just the beginning of a series of events that occurred. You know, I ended up getting C. diff, which is a really bad, internal parasite that gives you diarrhea, and your body stops getting its nutrients. So that had been going on. So I had that. Then I got MRSA, which is a type of really bad staph infection in my foot. And they started cutting into my foot, surgery after surgery. Finally, we did an amputation on my right leg in 2012. Then I was struggling with prosthetics after that healed because my stump was so short because surgery wasn't done by the right people. I didn't know that there was a certain surgeon that needed to do it. I don't know why general surgery did it. They should have referred that to like a neurosurgeon or somebody who is qualified to do that. So there was lots of complications from that surgery. After I got into prosthetics, we realized my knee was bad. So they did a knee replacement on my amputated limb. And in 2014, they did that. Then in 2016, I ended up having my knee amputated or leg amputated above the knee because there were so many problems with trying to wear prosthetics and pain and lack of range of motion. I pretty much just kind of gave up on the prosthetic stuff. And over the years, there's been probably 30 plus surgeries on my limbs, my spine, my hands, trying to get my mobility back after my spinal cord injury because professionals told me I needed to be more mobile. And I'm so young, ruined my body. Like my shoulders are now bad. My elbows are bad. My wrists are bad. I have carpal tunnel in both hands. There's nerve damage from the use of crutches and propelling in manual chairs. You know, my foot's all fused together and my toes are all crumpled up from the atrophy. It's very painful. It's very stressful. I mean, I feel like the rest of my life is spent in recovery from that bad decision. And I know that I can't go back and undo any of that. And I believe that it's made me a better person. It's made me more empathetic towards people. It's made me a lot more patient because you have to learn to adapt to survive. It's just like figure it out. People ask me, well, how do I do things? And the answer is just the same way everybody else does. You figure it out. If it's too high, you build a staircase. You build a winch. You know, I mean, there's just, I spend a lot of my day working around my disability, but I try to not let it control my life. And it's hard when there's so many different things going on, trying to advocate for yourself constantly, you know, in a world that's just very hard to negotiate and get through if you're able.
So do you think the world just doesn't think about disabled people and what disabled people need?
Well, I think that there is certainly some stigma and a lack of education. I mean, I'll take myself, for instance, just purely talking from my own experience. Before I was paralyzed and I didn't have the ability or don't have the ability now to just get up and run or walk or bend down to pick something up, or it's like we take things for granted. And I think that's one of the luxuries of being human, that we're able to take for granted some of these things in life until you find yourself in a situation where now you have to do things completely different. Now you have to adapt your world in a world that isn't adapted for you. A lot of things aren't wheelchair accessible. There are a lot of things that are, and every year things are getting better with ADA compliance and cities doing construction work on sidewalks and whatnot. But there's still a lot of businesses and stuff that people can't go to in wheelchairs. Like right now I volunteer at a place which I will not mention, but the bathroom there isn't accessible. And I was really shocked that they wouldn't have an accessible bathroom. Like I didn't even think about it until I needed to use the bathroom, and I couldn't get in there with my wheelchair. So I had to improvise and figure it out. But generally, I think people just don't really think about people who have a disability unless it really affects them. It's just you see somebody and you don't really think about it. You don't really think about, gee, I wonder what that person's life is like every day for them, with whatever it is they're going through. You just simply see somebody in a wheelchair or with a walker or a prosthetic, and you just kind of move on. So now that I'm injured and I have to do things differently, I do wish that there was a little bit more education for people, or, like everybody spends the day in a wheelchair and everybody has to just do everything in a wheelchair and figure out how to do that. And most people would be amazed at the things that they're not able to do or that are extremely difficult. So I just think education is the biggest thing. And people, if you don't know about something, you just don't know. That's where I think kind of some of the ignorance comes in.
Right. Like I've been saying, I usually see people as objects rather than things that have feelings and families and people that care about them. And I think that's the big problem of the world is people are too focused on themselves versus how they can help their fellow human. And that's a lot of what you.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I'm much of the same, or should I say, I'm working on that myself, because I agree. It's like, I feel like people are just objects, either in my way generally, or I need to deal with that to human interaction to get something that I personally need. And yeah, it's kind of, I think you're right. The majority of the world thinks like that, and it's because most people don't live in the moment. We're thinking about what happened yesterday. We're thinking about what we need to do tomorrow. We're robbing ourselves of the quality that we have right now, this moment. If people
Since I came into recovery, I feel differently now about things. Like I can appreciate other people, even though they still annoy me. I can give them their space and say, well, that person is driving really slow or erratic. Well, maybe they're looking for an address. They're not just trying to irritate everyone behind them. I get really mad in the road. But that's again, people don't take into account there's others around them.
Right. I think everybody, like you said, everybody is so wrapped up in their own little personal bubble. We just don't take the time to take those blinders off or pop that bubble and look around and be like, oh, wow, there is more than just me in the world. And everybody has a story. And I feel now that everybody's story is valid. And I don't feel like my story is more important than somebody else's story. And that has taken some time, I think, to just kind of come to a more level-headed understanding with things. I mean, I'm one of these people now who tries to just kind of sit with things a bit before I just make a impulsive decision. And you're right, everybody has something going on, and we don't know what somebody else has going on. No, we just know that we feel a certain way about something we see or experience, and we assign anger to that. And then we're angry because somebody's going slowly. I mean, there's 100 examples. People just aren't mindful enough.
Yeah, in recovery, we always say, let it begin with me. And I think that if a lot of people did begin with looking at themselves, it would not only improve the way they look on the world, but it would improve the way other people see them. Like it would improve the way their children see them. It would improve the way they interact with their children and their families and their coworkers. It's just, it all has to start within ourselves. And that's what everyone is missing out on. The happiness everyone is seeking, it's in our souls, and that's the only way to find happiness is to heal our soul.
Yeah, I could agree. I think healing is definitely part of any process of recovery. I think if we're viewing ourselves as damaged or less than just kind of pure divinity, or just, I believe everybody is the way they're supposed to be physically. Just, I think we all spend so much time trying to manufacture this perfect life or the scenario where it works for everybody else. And I know I used to be a people pleaser, and it was so exhausting. I mean, literally, I just, like, at the end of the day, I was done. I just plopped down, and it wasn't until I started to realize that I don't need to be everybody's everything. Not everybody needs to like me. I'm not going to like everybody else. Yeah, sorry, kind of got off on a squirrel.
No, that's fine. Because if that's what people don't understand, if you don't like somebody else, it's not that big of a deal. You don't have to kill them because you don't like them. You just leave them alone. And how hard is that to do in today's society? Because we have all this crime and people are killing each other, and kids are killing kids, and because they don't know how to deal with human emotions.
And it's getting, unfortunately, it's getting worse and worse, I feel, because humans are becoming less and less connected. We're spending less time with actual physical people, like presence, group gatherings, people doing things for a common goal. Everybody's more wrapped up in this digital bubble, and I think it's scary to see where things are headed if people can't, like you said, look inside themselves and make some changes.
Okay, so I think we're gonna wrap up here soon. So if there's people struggling who have like been in the situation you've been in, is there anything you want to say to them? Give them some hope?
Well, I mean, I struggle with, mental health problems. I struggled with alcoholism. I struggled with an addiction to methamphetamines. I've tried to commit suicide before. As somebody who is 14 months sober now, I have a different perspective. And I got to that different perspective by believing in myself for the first time. I realized I didn't believe in myself at all. And if I couldn't believe in myself, I mean, if I couldn't look at myself as a whole individual, recovery is very hard. But my advice to anybody struggling with any of those issues would be to seek some help. And that can be hard to do in today's society, depending upon your status in the world. Do you have insurance that will cover the visit? Is it this blah blah blah? Personally going through it now, it's very tough to get some of the help you need because waiting lists are so long. But help is out there. I do believe that we all can find somebody that we can confide in, even if maybe that's your higher power, however you see that. You really have to start believing in yourself and giving yourself some credit and cutting yourself some slack. I mean, I know I'm so hard on myself. I'm way harder on myself than anybody else is. And I think we all need somebody in the world that we can open up to and just completely be ourselves. That really is how I'll end that, is be yourself.
Right. And I discovered recovery through 12-step programs. What do you think of 12-step programs? I know that they're free, but there is a lot of stigma around them. So what are your thoughts on them?
Well, I've been in positions where I've mandatory had to go to meetings. So I've been to a lot of AA and NA meetings. Personally, I have never worked the 12 steps. I have never been in a treatment facility where the 12 steps, were used as the principle for recovery. My thought is this. I don't personally buy into some of it, and maybe buy-in isn't the right word. It's kind of like take what you can use and leave the rest. I don't know how to really explain.
Yeah, that's the slogan in 12-step recovery.
Right.
Take what you like and leave the rest. But it's just like
Right.
this gentle path towards healing yourself. I mean, there's questions that are asked, and you don't have to tell anyone. You just answer them yourself, and it makes you look into yourself and see, well, what's up? Why do I do this or do that? And then the whole reason for the meetings is the fellowship part, and to learn how to socialize again with people and learn how to live life without alcohol, drugs, or whatever the addiction or behavior is.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I wanted to say after what I said is I don't personally, I mean, there are a lot of things that I've used. And my thought on it is if 12 steps works for you and helps you in your path to recovery, being, a clean, sober, better individual, then I am not in any position to tell you that's right or that's wrong. Whatever works for you works for you. And I think everybody takes, like you said, the whole God thing, the stigma, the out of context. It's just, there's a lot of good things in AA. And I know, like I've said, they've helped millions of people maintain a sobriety. I will say that something I'm struggling with and maybe pursuing AA would help this is that whole fellowship and socialization after sobriety. It's like you get clean, but then you become a hermit and you don't really have any kind of social life. You don't do anything much. And it's like you're sober, but you're not really recovered.
Right. And it's so accessible. And I use a lot of other podcasts in my recovery because I don't have time to go to a meeting. And I do try to go to physical meetings sometimes, but most of the time it's through Zoom because I don't want to drive to a meeting late at night. And the kinds that I go to, there aren't meetings all the time. They're just once in a while. So Zoom is the best place, but that's not the best place to get individual friendships. It's in the smaller groups where you find the fellowship and face to face.
Yeah, that human interaction.
Okay, well, I think that we're going to wrap up here. In closing, I would like to say that the opinions expressed here were strictly of my own making or by my future guests. Take what you like and leave the rest. You may come to realize that you may not like me or what I want to share. Let's talk to each other, reason things out, but let there be no gossip or criticism of one another. Let the fellowship of ethical human behavior and the serenity from positive human interaction help you grow and chill out, one experience at a time. I would like to thank my higher power for guiding me through this podcast. I hope to spread the message of love, hope, and understanding by touching one life at a time.
All right, pause that. Back to here. All right, so yep, that was it. And as you see, there's more episodes coming up, and I suppose I can stop sharing this now. So that was a little bit difficult with a cat in the room. Let me see, what kind of notes did I write down? Yep, so I learned a little more about my brother, and I learned about my father in this episode, and Ty hit on some great points, and good job, Ty. It wasn't bad. I'm starting to grow with the podcast, and I'm bad at interrupting people. I noticed that. So, oh, darn cat. All right, so I'm going to sign off so that I can get to bed. Bye-bye. Thanks for joining me. Join me again for, I believe, another Bible journey.